This is what a poverty mindset looks like, guys, my brother Edric said, shoving his camera stabilizer right into my tear-streaked face. He was live-streaming my father's funeral to 2 million people. My sister Artemis is spiraling. It is tragic. I stared at him, then passed him to my mother, Susan. She wasn't mourning. She was shaking hands with a demolition contractor, while 3 bulldozers idled at the main gate. They hadn't even waited for the dirt to settle on my father's grave before coming to erase him. Before we expose the truth they tried to bury, drop a comment. What time is it where you are right now? I want to see how far this story travels. I wiped the grit from my cheeks. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was just dirt. I didn't scream at Edric. I didn't beg Susan to stop shaking hands with the man who wanted to bulldoze my life. I just turned my back on their performance. I walked past the camera, past the idling bulldozers, and stepped into the waystation booth. It was a small, reinforced steel box that had been my office, my sanctuary, and my command center for 10 years. I slammed the heavy steel door shut and threw the deadbolt. The sound echoed like a gunshot, cutting through the noise of the diesel engines outside. Through the bulletproof plexiglass, I saw Edric falter. He lowered his phone for a fraction of a second, confusion flickering behind his influencer smile. He didn't understand why I wasn't playing the victim. He didn't understand that while he was building a following, I was building a fortress. I walked to the control panel and flipped the red switch on the wall. The hum started low, a deep, vibrating thrum that you could feel in your teeth. The electrified perimeter fence surged to life. 10,000 volts of do not touch crackled through the air. Outside, the hum grew louder, drowning out his commentary, drowning out the engines, drowning out Susan's laugh. I saw them flinch. My mother took a sharp step back, her high heels sinking into the mud. Edric nearly dropped his stabilizer. I sat down in my chair, the leather cracked and smelling of old oil and stale coffee. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the book. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. The cover was stained with grease and 10 years of grime. We called it the sabotage log. My father, William, had taught me to keep it. If they come for us, Artie, he had said, we don't argue. We document. I opened it to the first blank line. The pages before it were filled with my handwriting and his. August 14th, 2018. Susan files zoning complaint. Number 12. March 3rd, 2020. Edric flies drone over Sector 4. Citation issued. November 10th, 2022. Health Department raid. False tip anonymously called in. Every attack. Every lie. Every attempt to starve us out. I picked up a pen and wrote the date. October 12th, 2:15 p.m. Trespassing. Attempted illegal demolition. Harassment. I looked up at the monitors lining the wall. 12 screens showing every angle of the yard. I saw Susan arguing with the foreman, gesturing wildly at the fence. I saw Edric trying to regain his composure, fixing his hair in the reflection of his phone screen. Desperate to spin this into content. They looked like ants from here. Noisy, destructive, insignificant ants. They thought they had cornered a grieving girl in a junkyard. They didn't know they had just walked into the crosshairs of the only person who knew where the bodies were buried. Figuratively speaking. Mostly. I leaned back and watched them. Let them scream. Let them bring the bulldozers. I had something stronger than heavy machinery. I had the truth. And I had the receipts. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was hunting. This war didn't start today. It started 10 years ago, with a cease and desist letter taped to a rusty gate. My mother, Susan, had just married her politician husband, and suddenly, the iron pit wasn't just her ex-husband's business. It was a stain on her campaign. She called it a toxic blight. She filed 14 lawsuits in 3 years. Nuisance complaints, zoning violations, environmental hazards that didn't exist. She tried to bleed us dry with legal fees. She thought we would fold. She thought we would sell the land for pennies just to make the subpoenas stop. She didn't know I wasn't just crushing cars. I was mining. While she was giving speeches at fundraisers, I was pulling 18-hour shifts in the processing shed. I learned that a ton of discarded circuit boards contains more gold than a ton of actual gold ore. I learned to strip copper with a precision that made the refineries bid against each other for my product. I didn't sleep. I processed e-waste until my hands were stained permanently gray. I paid every single one of her legal fees in cash, on time, and with a receipt. And while I was sweating in the mud, Edric was building his empire on our backs. He launched his podcast, Breaking the Chain. He told 5 million listeners about growing up in squalor. He described my father as a mentally ill hoarder who loved trash more than his children. He filmed hidden camera videos when he deigned to visit, zooming in on the piles of scrap, framing it as tragedy. He sold mindset mastery courses to kids who wanted to escape their own families. He monetized our struggle. He turned my father's life into a cautionary tale for clicks. But Edric never looked inside the barrels. I remember the night William took me to Sector 4. It was raining. A cold, miserable sleet that turned the yard into a swamp. He walked me past the mountains of crushed sedans and the stacks of rusted beams to a row of unassuming steel drums marked industrial slag. He pried the lid off one. Inside, it just looked like gray, ugly rocks. They laugh at us, Artie, he said, his voice low against the rain. Edric laughs. Susan sues. They see a pile of garbage. He picked up a rock, weighing it in his grease-stained hand. But the world is changing. Electric cars, wind turbines, guidance systems for missiles. They all need this. He placed the rock in my hand. It was heavy, dense. This is neodymium, he whispered. We aren't hoarding trash. We are stockpiling the periodic table. The dirt is the disguise, Artie. This is the retirement fund. That was the night I stopped being a mechanic. I realized I wasn't guarding a junkyard. I was sitting on a strategic national asset worth $200 million. I learned the market rates. I learned the defense contracts. I learned that the people who looked down on us were driving cars powered by the very thing they called garbage. I let them laugh. I let them sue. I let Edric build his brand on the lie of our poverty, because silence was the only security system that mattered. The roar of diesel engines woke me up before my alarm did. I sat up in the cot, blinking against the thin light filtering through the trailer window. It wasn't the rhythmic chug of our sorting machines. It was deeper, angrier. I pulled the curtain back an inch. They were back. Susan was standing at the main gate, her posture rigid with authority. She was slapping a bright orange sticker onto the metal mesh, an emergency environmental remediation order. I recognized the tactic immediately. It was the nuclear option. She had leveraged her husband's political capital to bypass the courts, bypass probate, and declare my home a public health hazard. She was talking to the foreman, the same political crony from yesterday. I couldn't hear her through the glass, but I knew what she was saying. The permit is pending, but level it today. Leave nothing standing. It was a calculated, illegal demolition disguised as a public service. And there was Edric. He was already live, pacing back and forth in front of the gate, shouting into his phone. We are breaking generational curses today, people. I could see his mouth moving, shaping the buzzwords he sold for $49.99 a month. We are cleaning up the mess. No more living in the past. He was framing this as a victory lap, a heroic intervention to save his sister from her own filth. Then, the sound of metal screaming. They cut the lock. The heavy chain fell to the mud with a dull thud. The gate swung open. They didn't wait. They marched onto the property like an invading army. Susan pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the lot, toward the rows of rusted barrels that looked like industrial waste. Level Sector 4 first, she ordered. My breath caught in my throat. Sector 4. The strategic reserve. The neodymium. They weren't just trespassing anymore. They weren't just breaking local zoning laws. By targeting those specific barrels, they had just unknowingly committed a felony against the United States Department of Defense. I watched them advance. The lead bulldozer lurched forward, its tracks churning the mud. They were going to crush the barrels. They were going to contaminate the site, ruin the product, and destroy a national asset. And they had no idea. I didn't reach for my phone to call 911. The local sheriff played golf with Susan's husband. I didn't reach for a weapon. I just watched, cold and calm, as they crossed the invisible line between a civil dispute and a federal crime. They wanted a war? They just invaded a battlefield they didn't even know existed. I stood on the trailer porch, the steam from my coffee curling into the cold morning air. Below me, the yard was a chaotic symphony of destruction. The chain-link fence was groaning as they dragged it aside. Edric was spinning in circles, filming the liberation of the property, his voice cracking with excitement. Susan was shouting directions, pointing at the barrels in Sector 4 like a general ordering a strike. I didn't reach for my cell phone. I knew better. Sheriff Miller played golf with Susan's husband every Sunday. A local call would just get lost in dispatch until the damage was done. They had the town locked down, but they didn't have the Pentagon. I turned back inside and walked to the corner of the office. There, bolted to the wall under a layer of dust, was the red rotary phone. It looked like a prop from a bad Cold War movie. William had installed it 5 years ago. Direct line, he had said. Hardwired, encrypted. If the gate breaches, you lift the receiver. You don't say hello. You say the code. I lifted the receiver. There was no dial tone, just a sharp, expectant silence. Asset compromised, I said. My voice was flat, clinical. Active intervention required. Unit is 2 miles out, a voice replied instantly. ETA 4 minutes. Hold the line. I hung up. 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, a bulldozer could crush 1,000 gallons of chemical storage. In 4 minutes, they could breach the containment seals on the neodymium. Once those seals broke, the material would oxidize. The value would drop from 200 million to 0 in the time it took to breathe. I couldn't let them touch the barrels. I checked my watch. 7:48 a.m. I walked down the metal steps of the trailer. My boots sank into the mud. The lead bulldozer was revving its engine, black smoke pouring from the stack. The driver, a guy with a thick neck and a thicker skull, was eyeing the stack of barrels. He shifted gears. The tracks bit into the earth. I didn't run. I walked. I walked straight past Edric, who was too busy reading his live chat to notice me. I walked past Susan, who was screaming something about finally cleaning up this mess. I walked directly into the path of the advancing machine. I stopped 10 feet in front of the blade. I crossed my arms. The driver slammed on the brakes. The machine lurched to a halt, the blade swinging dangerously close to my head. The engine idled down to a confused rumble. He leaned out of the cab, spitting tobacco juice into the mud. "Move it, sweetheart," he yelled. "We got a permit." "You have a death wish," I said, though he couldn't hear me over the engine. Susan came storming over, her face twisted in fury. "Artemis, get out of the way. You are obstructing a lawful remediation order." I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was wearing a white trench coat in a mud pit. She looked ridiculous. She looked like a tourist in a war zone. "You're standing on federal property, Mother," I said. "And you just ordered a civilian contractor to tamper with a classified defense stockpile. It's trash," she screamed, gesturing at the barrels. "It's rusty, toxic trash. And I am removing it." I checked my watch. 2 minutes left. I needed them to commit. I needed them to be so undeniably guilty that no amount of political favors could wash it off. "Go ahead," I said, stepping aside. "Open one." The foreman looked at Susan, then at me, then at the barrel. He shrugged, hefting a crowbar he had pulled from the cab. He jammed the metal tip under the sealed lid of the nearest drum. "Do it," Susan hissed. He leaned his weight onto the bar. Metal screeched against metal. The seal popped with a sharp hiss. That was the trigger. They didn't come with sirens. Sirens are a warning, and the Department of Defense doesn't give warnings. They came with the roar of reinforced engines and the crunch of heavy tires on gravel. 3 black SUVs tore through the open gate, moving in a tight, predatory formation. They drifted sideways, blocking the exit, sealing the yard. The foreman froze, the crowbar still wedged in the lid. He didn't even have time to drop it. Doors flew open. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn but low. They moved with a fluid, terrifying precision that made the local SWAT team look like mall cops. "Federal agents," the voice was amplified, booming off the stacks of scrap metal. "Step away from the asset. Hands in the air. Now." The foreman dropped the crowbar like it was burning his skin. 2 agents were on him before it hit the mud. They slammed him against the tracks of his own bulldozer, zip-tying his hands behind his back. Susan stood frozen in the chaos, her mouth opening and closing. She didn't look scared. She looked indignant. She looked like someone whose credit card had just been declined at a restaurant where she knew the owner. She marched toward the lead agent, a tall man with stone-cold eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, pointing a finger at his chest. "I am Susan Sterling. My husband is Senator Sterling. We have a remediation order." The agent didn't blink. He didn't check her ID. He grabbed her wrist, spun her around, and clicked the cuffs onto her wrists. "Susan Sterling," he said, his voice flat and bored. "You are under arrest for tampering with strategic national stockpile assets and violation of the Espionage Act, Title 18. You have the right to remain silent." "Espionage?" She let out a hysterical laugh. "It's a junkyard. It's trash. You are making a huge mistake. I will have your badge. I will have your job. Ma'am, you just ordered a civilian contractor to breach a containment vessel for classified rare earth elements used in missile guidance systems. Your husband can't help you here. In fact, he's probably already deleting your number." I walked down the muddy slope from the bulldozer. The agents let me pass. They knew who I was. I stopped in front of my mother. Her white trench coat was splattered with mud. Her hair was coming loose. She looked small. She looked furious. "You knew," she spat at me. "You set me up." "I didn't set you up," I said calmly. "I just didn't stop you." I looked at the yard, at the empire of rust she had despised for 30 years. "You spent your whole life chasing currency, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "Status. Likes. Votes. You thought those things made you powerful. Dad spent his life building value. Currency devalues. Markets crash. Beauty fades. But value? Value is strategic. I nodded toward the barrels she had tried to crush. You walked past $1 billion every day for 20 years because it looked like dirt to you. You thought you were too good for this place. Now, you're going to prison because of it. Edric was still filming. He had seen the SUVs and immediately assumed they were Homeland Security. The cavalry he had been promising his viewers. He had run toward them, shouting, "Finally, the feds are here to clean up this disaster. Watch this, guys." He had been so desperate for the win, so hungry for the validation of strangers, that he hadn't processed what was happening right in front of him. He kept the camera rolling as the agents slammed the foreman against the bulldozer. He kept it rolling as they cuffed his mother. It wasn't until the lead agent turned toward him that the reality finally pierced his delusion. The agent didn't look like a savior. He looked like a predator. "Phone," the agent said, extending a gloved hand. "Wait! I'm documenting this," Edric stammered, backing away. "I'm with the press. Well, social media press. I called you guys." The agent stepped forward and snatched the phone from Edric's hand with a single, fluid motion. But he didn't turn it off. He looked at the screen, saw the viewer count ticking upward, saw the chat scrolling so fast it was a blur of emojis and shock. 2 million people were watching. "This is a federal crime scene," the agent said, his voice amplified by the phone's microphone. He looked directly into the camera lens. "The individuals in this video are being detained for espionage and tampering with national defense assets." He turned the phone slightly, framing the yard behind him. "This facility is not a junkyard. It is a strategic holding site for rare earth elements vital to national security. The estimated value of the assets these individuals attempted to destroy is $200 million. I watched Edric's face. It crumbled. The smug, self-assured mask he wore for his followers cracked and fell away, leaving behind a terrified child. He looked at me, then at the phone, then at his mother being shoved into the back of an SUV. $200 million? He whispered. "That's right," I said, stepping closer so the microphone would pick me up. "Dad wasn't a hoarder, Edric. He was a genius. He saw value where you only saw dirt. And because you were too busy mocking him to ask a single question, you just tried to destroy your own inheritance." The chat was going nuclear. I could see the comments even from here. Fraud. Liar. Traitor. Number-free Artemis. His empire of lies, built on the foundation of our supposed poverty, was disintegrating in real time. He reached for me, his hand trembling. "Artie, please," he begged. Tell them I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't care," I said. "You used us for content. Well, here's your finale." The agent ended the stream and handed the phone to another officer as evidence. They cuffed Edric next. He didn't fight, he just sagged, defeated by the weight of his own arrogance. The SUVs drove away in a cloud of dust, taking my mother and brother to a federal holding facility. They wouldn't be getting bail anytime soon. The yard was suddenly quiet, save for the wind whistling through the stacks of metal. I walked back into the office. It felt different now. The siege was over. I opened the heavy steel safe in the corner. The one William had told me never to touch until the wolves were gone. Inside, there was a single envelope. It had my name on it in his jagged, blocky handwriting. I sat in his old chair and opened it. "Artie, if you are reading this, the secret is out. I hope you forgave me for the silence. I didn't hide the wealth to test you. I hid it because wealth attracts wolves, and I wanted you to learn how to build the machine before I gave you the keys. I regret that I couldn't give you a pretty life, with clean hands and nice clothes. But I gave you a fortress instead. And I gave you the strength to hold it. The world runs on what we have in this yard. Never let them tell you it's trash. Never let them tell you that you are trash. You are the Iron Queen now. Love, Dad." I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. I wiped my eyes. Not with a tissue, but with the back of a glove stained with oil and hard work. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was fully up now, glinting off the rows of barrels in Sector 4. They weren't ugly anymore. They were beautiful. They were power. I picked up my welding mask from the desk and pulled it on. The world narrowed to a small, focused rectangle of light. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a scapegoat. I was the CEO of a $200 million fortress, and I had work to do. Real power doesn't always shine. Sometimes, it looks like rust. If you're building your own fortress in silence, share this story. We see you.